the front line is really where the war is, and anybody 100 yards behind the front lines doesn't really know what it's like. And this, every time I hear people talk about sending troops into combat, I just cringe because I think to myself, these people that send them have no concept of what hell is. And there's an old Marine poem that was written by an anonymous World War II Marine. It says, when he gets to heaven, to St. Peter he'll tell, another Marine reporting, sir, I've served my time in hell.
"60 years ago, on the 7th of December 1941, Japan suddenly attacked Pearl Harbor, transforming the war against Germany into one that spanned the world. The Pacific War was fought with ferocious savagery, across vast oceans, remote islands, dense jungles. It was a war of hate, without rules or pity, mangling the lives of many different peoples. Its legacy of bitterness and grief is still unresolved.
My two very close friends that were killed, they're buried over in Hawaii in a punch bowl. And I've been back to the graves a couple of times. I walk over there and I look down on them, I shake my head, I salute them, and then I turn around and walk away. And I just turn around and walk away.
It's still with me and all the others. I'm no exception. They're all the same. People say, after 60 years, you have nightmares? Yes. So has Charlie. So has Jimmy. So has Harry. They all have.
Those that were there didn't really want to speak about it. They saw too much, they lost too many friends, and the only time that they feel that they can let go of their emotions and talk about it is when they get together. They feel that they've got something to share and they understand what they went through.
Good night and God bless you. May angels caress you and always watch o'er you.
Dick Lee and Duncan Ferguson spent 3.5 years as prisoners of the Japanese, forced to build the Railway of Death across Burma and Thailand.
And the suffering them men went through, all so unnecessary. It's only when I talk about it, then I get bitter. I think it's understandable.
For Lester Tenney, hell began on the Bataan Death March along this road in the Philippines. A fellow American dropped to the side, exhausted.
The Japanese officer just took a samurai sword and went like this, wham, and hit the fellow on the back of the neck and went right straight through it, and the head fell off. And that's the part that's horrible and will live with you forever. Never forget it. You never forget seeing the head on the floor. You never see his arm still moving, his legs still moving, but the head is off. Never forget it.
The pain of brutal experiences intensified men's hatred and lust for revenge, as did the loss of a comrade.
Well, they evacuated him there, and he died the next day aboard ship. And that sure did put a different perspective on my part in the war. That's why killing the Japs was no problem at all. In fact, at times it was an outright pleasure.
Battlefield executions by the Japanese, hands tied behind the back. Japan had signed but never ratified the Geneva Convention. It was a clash of arms, of cultures and ideas.
We were taught that dying was lighter than a bird's feather, that it was easy to die. It was how we were trained. So we weren't scared of dying. Even when a comrade died, all we thought was, what a pity for him. We just thought he was unlucky. We used to say, I'll be joining you soon, because that's how we saw it.
The front line was everywhere. Chinese soldiers discover a group of women forced into prostitution by the Japanese. No woman in the army's path was safe.
I saw my classmates dragged through the streets to be raped by the Japanese in Bayview Hotel. I saw my neighbors cut down by sniper bullets. And the killing was terrible. It was like a scene from hell.
Both sides cast off civilized taboos. Looting and desecration of bodies became commonplace. Some Allied units made it a point of pride to take no prisoners. For others, it just seemed like common sense.
We had such intense hatred for them, and they were so tricky, coming in with their hands up like that, and then when you got close enough, they opened their arms out, and out dropped 2 grenades, one for each armpit. And so we just automatically shot them, unless some officer stopped us.
Survive, win, get home. Any threat to these ruling obsessions was swiftly dealt with, whether a wounded Japanese soldier or a suspicious-looking cave.
We just blew it up. We don't know if there was women and children, whatever. We just blew them up. We just didn't have time to waste. You know, some people will tell you today, cruel and inhumane, but you weren't there. We were.
This is the story of those who were there. And it begins in Japan. Japan's officers in the Pacific War saw themselves as heirs to the ancient and honorable tradition of the warrior or samurai.
In those days, we naturally accepted the tradition that Japanese samurai, in olden times, fought with a sword. I believe that by carrying swords ourselves, we became samurai.
In the process, they adopted some of the ruthless practices of the great warrior clans of the past. In Osaka Castle, there are 17th century paintings of battles between mighty rivals. They seem like chivalric knights in fair fight. Then you notice a man beheaded, another trampled to death, children drowned, women hiding, women begging for mercy, women dragged away. This was how the Japanese officer and his men would fight the Pacific War, merciless to the enemy, and above all, loyal to their master until death. Japan's young master, Crown Prince Hirohito, welcomed to Britain. Japan had beaten Russia in 1905 and sided with the Allies in the First World War. Anxious to be accepted in the West, she had treated her Russian and German prisoners well. Japan was now a pillar of the international community. But her treatment of other Asians horrified those who had witnessed her war with China in 1894.
Unarmed men kneeling in the streets and begging for life were shot, bayoneted,
Nobody
or
was
beheaded.
spared, man, woman, or child that I could see. The streets
Everywhere we saw bodies torn and mangled as if by wild beasts, a meaningless and unnecessary massacre.
War was about winning or losing. We didn't think about humanity at all. We believed we could do anything to win. When we won the war against China, because we'd won all our previous battles, we were very arrogant.
Crowned Divine Emperor in 1926, Hirohito was symbol and proof of Japan's racial superiority. Having a living god as emperor conferred great honor upon his people, which they repaid in reverential servility.
Since we'd never be able to meet the Emperor in person, we had a picture of him which we prayed to every morning and night. I used to say, "I'll do my very best today, Emperor. Please don't be worried."
The army led the nation in blind obedience. Sadistic training produced soldiers utterly submissive to those above them and pitiless to those below.
The soldiers were forced into a slave mentality towards their officers. There was no concept of human rights. The result was that when they were sent abroad, they in turn thought it okay to act brutally against people they saw as inferiors.
When we were small, we were often taught this song which went, "We are tired of living in this small country, Japan. Across the sea lies China, with its 400 million people."
10 years before Pearl Harbor, Japan took the long road to war. In 1931, hungry for resources and living space, she occupied Manchuria.
The League of Nations meets at Geneva to vote on the report holding Japan responsible for the conflict with China over Manchuria.
His Excellency Mr. Matsuoka, delegate of Japan.
Japan had, the League said, forcibly seized Manchuria and must now negotiate a settlement with China.
Japan finds it impossible to accept the report adopted by the Assembly.
The Japanese delegates refuse to accept the decision and sensationally walk out of the Assembly.
Japan no longer felt any need to stay in the world's good books. But a young Japanese diplomat, Toshikazu Kase, realized even then the danger of Japan's isolation.
Japan is an island country. An island country is dependent on the sea, so you've got to have broad perspectives. But that was a time when Japan's perspective was getting narrower and narrower.
In 1937, war broke out between China and Japan, which lasted till 1945. The Japanese emperor said in 1941 that the aim was to punish rebellious enemy people. The Japanese advance into China alerted the world of the hell to come. And the starkest warning of all came in 1937, when the Japanese reached Nanking. The road to Nanking lay through a string of villages like Xianhumen. Japanese soldiers were brought up to hate the Chinese, and they were ordered to live off the land. It was a fatal combination.
When we went searching for food, we found women hiding. We thought, oh, they look tasty, so we raped them. But every single time a woman was raped, the soldiers would kill her.
Shiro Azuma was one of the Japanese soldiers beating a path to Nanking. Xianhumen was doubly cursed. The Japanese terrorized the locals and brought other Chinese here for execution. 1,000 are buried beneath this mound, and there are 2 more in the village. Now on his 7th pilgrimage to China, Shiro Azuma is openly repentant. He once had to kill 3 farmers.
One of them somehow reminded me of my father, so I wasn't all that willing. I kept cutting into his head, into his skull instead of his neck. The blood squirted out. My pal Majima shouted, "You're too high." And I tried again and chopped his head off. Anyway, what's stuck in my mind ever since then is the second man who insisted he was not a soldier, he was a farmer. He told us he had a wife, 2 children, and his parents waiting at home for him. "I'm just a farmer," he said. "I'm no soldier." He begged us not to kill him. I killed him. This incident has stayed with me to this day.
The Japanese rolled into Nanking, subjecting its people to 6 weeks of unbridled violence. American missionary John McGee smuggled his camera into the university hospital. A 13-year-old boy beaten with an iron bar, then bayoneted. A girl slashed in the elbow after seeing her mother and father slaughtered. A woman whose head the Japanese tried to cut off.
Kick a chink, kick a dog, kick a stone. It was all the same. We were arrogant. Killing a Chinese person was just like killing a dog.
I knocked one Japanese over. The others bashed my face in, then slashed my cheeks. The blood poured down. It sprayed all over them. Then they both stabbed me in the stomach. I was pregnant at the time, and the blood just gushed out. I fell flat on the ground. This is a shot of me lying on a sick bed in the hospital. My face was all swollen up. This is the picture Mr. McGee took of me at the time. This leg's got scars, and more here too. One bayonet slash after another. Lots of scars. There are some on the other leg too, here and here, all from the bayonets. I had 18 cuts on my face and 18 cuts on my legs.
There was one here, on my stomach. If it hadn't been for that cut, my child wouldn't have died. I had a 7-month-old little boy in my belly. That night I had a miscarriage. The doctor listened, but he wasn't breathing.
Nanking's YMCA director, George Fitch, risked his life filming a Japanese roundup of Chinese men on suspicion of being ex-soldiers. Some of their womenfolk knelt on the ground, pleading in vain for mercy.
The Japanese rounded us up, shouted an order, then machine-gunned us. I was terrified and fainted. Dead bodies pressed down on me.
Pan Kai-ming was one of hundreds brought to the Yangtze River to die, and one of very few to cheat death.
When I came to, I thought, my God, am I human or a ghost? I mean, the Japanese had shot me dead with a machine gun. I lay there thinking, I must be a ghost. Then I felt the bodies pressing down on me. By now, they were going stiff. But my body was still soft. My breath was still warm. My mouth was telling my head, maybe I'm not dead.
When he was sure the Japanese had gone, Pan Kai-ming climbed out from the dead.
When I got home, my old auntie said how pitiful I looked. Child, she said, I did all I could to find you. I turned over piles of dead bodies, but you weren't there. Where did you go? I said, my God, I've been to the city of corpses. I've been to hell and back.
When Shiro Azuma reached the Yangtze, the water was so thick with bodies he used them as stepping stones to his transport ship. There have been excavations in Nanking. This is one of 17 burial grounds. Around 250,000 people were killed in Nanking, and there were other massacres across China. But Japan wasn't the only colonizer in the Asia-Pacific region with blood on her hands. In 1899, the United States had invaded the Philippines, using frontiersmen fresh from slaughtering native Indians in America. By the time the Philippines were brought to heel, the burial pits held over 40,000 bodies. The rest of the region had long since been carved up by the British, the French, the Australians, and the Dutch. Japan felt hemmed in by arrogant old empires. She resented their presence and needed their raw materials: oil, rubber, metals and minerals. But in 1940, the West imposed trade embargoes to curb Japan's adventurism.
Japan didn't have any resources in those days. If imports of iron and oil were blocked, Japan couldn't survive. When I was a child, I was told that if things continued that way with economic sanctions, our enemies would just colonize us.
In 1940, Japan's increasingly militant leaders signed an alliance with Nazi Germany. Japan prepared for a sacred racial war to secure vital resources, kick out the West, and confirm herself as the rightful steward of Asia.
We knew that Japan would be the enemy if it came to war. And we knew that because we were trained to believe that. We were told to believe that. And as early as July and August of 1941, while we were training, we were told we will be at war with Japan in a relatively short period of time. So know your enemy.
They were small, they were buck-toothed, they wore glasses, very thick.
And we thought we could shoot these guys down with our left hand.
Can't shoot straight and crap equipment.
They had silly grins on their face, and they tend to have the stature of monkeys with long arms that almost drag to the ground.
It's all a lot of bullshit, isn't it? I mean, but this is what you get fed while you're doing your training out there. We are the people. Who dare tread on our toes? These are only inferiors. They people showed us different anyway, didn't they?
Late November 41, a huge Japanese task force crossed the Pacific in secret. Its mission, to destroy the US Fleet and Air Force in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. In Washington, President Roosevelt insisted Japan withdraw from China before sanctions could be lifted. Japan's diplomats would never agree to that, but her leaders weren't certain a war with America was winnable. It fell to Toshikazu Kase to draft Japan's final diplomatic note. He wasn't told the fleet was steaming towards Pearl Harbor and got caught between the emperor and the military over whether to declare war.
Properly speaking, you should always declare war. However, Japan could not win a war without a surprise attack. That's how it had been since the Russo-Japanese War. But if you declare war, then your attack isn't going to be a surprise. There's a dilemma there. At that time, I had several meetings with Emperor Hirohito. He thought a surprise attack might be the only way forward for us, but he would prefer to avoid it. He thought we should declare war.
But Japan's hardline military got its way, and the emperor approved the surprise attack. America may be enraged for a while, Prime Minister Tojo said, but then she will come to understand.
I couldn't sleep the night before the attack. I had a few beers. I tend to fall asleep when I get drunk. So I had 6 large bottles, but I still didn't get at all drunk. I had to take off the next day without having had a wink of sleep. I think we all left with the feeling, this is the end of my life.
Those sights are engraved on my brain. The mechanics, deck crew and our officers gave us an enthusiastic send-off, shouting out to us to do our best. We left them behind on deck, praying for us.
There had been warnings throughout 1941, but the commanders in Pearl Harbor didn't believe the Japanese would dare attack. A radar operator who saw the wave of aircraft on his screen was told not to worry. They must be American. When the Japanese struck, everyone thought it was an exercise.
We actually saw the planes fly right over us, which was about less than 100 feet above us. We waved to the pilot. We're waving at the pilot. He didn't wave back, by the way. He did not wave back.
By chance, I spotted a large battleship just below us, so I dived down onto it and released my bomb. We skimmed away over Ford Island at an altitude of 30 meters. I tried hard not to kill our speed.
I can remember running up topside, and they're saying the Japs are attacking, the Japs are attacking. And I'm thinking, oh, sure, you know.
At 8:10 a.m., a bomb struck the battleship Arizona.
Loudest noise I've ever heard in my life. It was awesome. It happened so fast. I would say she sank in, I'd say maybe 2 minutes, 3 minutes.
Over 1,100 men were dead or dying, trapped below decks.
We started strafing, and oh how terrifying the anti-aircraft fire was. Shells like lollipops buzzed up towards me and split right before my eyes, just missing me.
The destroyer Shaw took a direct hit from a dive bomber. On 1010 Pier, the mine layer Oglala slowly rolled over. The Japanese left 2,500 dead and a host of scorched and dazed young men.
We took one hit. It took all the skin off my face, off my arms, off my legs. So the big problem was the burns, keeping me alive because of the burns. We thought we were tough, invincible. We weren't.
The Japanese hit other US Pacific bases, including the Philippines. The idea was to force isolationist America to the negotiating table. But America was in no mood for isolation or talk.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. No matter how long it may take us to overcome this premeditated invasion, the American people in their righteous might will win through to absolute victory.
Appearances at Pearl Harbor were deceptive. 6 of the 8 battleships were eventually raised and fought again. The aircraft carriers were all safe. American industrial might would massively expand her Pacific fleet.
I knew we were going to lose. So my mind was always on what Japan was going to do after her defeat. Someone at my level in the foreign ministry wouldn't be much good if he couldn't foresee the outcome of the war. Of course we were going to lose. But by then it was too late to turn back.
60 years on, oil still bubbles up from the Arizona's tanks. The treachery of the attack fueled American revenge. By the end of the war, said one admiral, Japanese would only be spoken in hell.
To be perfectly honest, I wanted to kill Japs because they had bombed Pearl Harbor.
We became completely and totally and unabashedly anti-Japanese.
It was like you were having an argument with a man, and suddenly he slapped you 3 times rapidly across the face. You can't wait for the 4th slap.
After Britain's 2 lonely years, Winston Churchill described Pearl Harbor as a blessing for bringing America into the war. And even as the Arizona was sinking, Britain was fighting Japan on the ground, hand to hand.
We didn't think that the Japanese would take on the British, let alone the Americans, but they did.
An hour before their planes hit Pearl Harbor, the Japanese invaded Malaya. One of these Japanese soldiers clambering down the ropes into the landing craft was Masao Maeda.
I wasn't really nervous. I was rather confident because ours was seen as a crack regiment. We young soldiers were raring to go and fight in places like the South Sea and so on. We didn't think it would be an enormous war.
The Japanese were outnumbered by the British in Malaya, but steadily overwhelmed them with aggressive tactics and superior equipment. The Royal Navy sent its new battleship Prince of Wales and the battlecruiser Repulse. But 3 days into the Pacific War, both were sunk by the Japanese Air Force. In all the war, said Churchill, I never received a more direct shock.
I mean, we just didn't believe it. It was impossible to believe. But there it was. And for the first time, one suddenly realized that one was up against a first-class power.
The Japs, they were the rulers of the sky. Our blokes went up there, the RAF, and the Japs just made rings round them. Poor sods just got wiped out as they went up. They went up, never came back.
They said that tanks could not be used in Malaya, and they came down with loads of tanks, and all we had against them was armoured cars. They were going in against the tanks and they just blew into bits.
So we had the tanks to put up with, the Air Force, their Air Force, and the Japanese Navy around the place. So it began to be a one-way trip all the way down.
A British soldier is equal to 10 Japanese, one squaddie said. But unfortunately, there are 11 Japanese. A cartoon in Punch, mid-January 1942, dismissed the Japanese as monkeys, pecking down trouble for themselves. The truth was, they were the masters in the jungle, and in Malaya.
We were absolutely obedient to any order to charge or attack. We did what we were told. We really didn't worry about our own lives.
They worried even less about the lives of soldiers they captured. Accounts of atrocities soon filtered out of the jungle.
There was 12 of our girls taken, and the Japanese tied them up with barbed wire and had bayonet practice on them. And only one survived.
In their wake, a trail of destruction. In their path, a prize of vast strategic and psychological importance.
Singapore was somehow the great fortress, a major trading station positioned at the very heart of a junction of seaways. Who controlled Singapore controlled the trade, controlled the shipping, and controlled the money.
Singapore had been British since 1819. Those at the top never thought mere Japanese could change that. And Britain's priority was the war against the Germans, 6,000 miles away. They sent outdated equipment and mostly raw troops.
There were British and Australians, and there were Gurkhas, there were Indians, there were Sikhs, all in uniform, and you would just naturally assume that the country and the cities were well defended. But occasionally one of the older patients might say to you, "Oh, sister, we'll be caught like rats in a trap."
The Japanese forged down the Malay Peninsula, closing in on Singapore. Just ahead of them, 30,000 British and Commonwealth troops retreated across the narrow causeway onto Singapore Island. Steadfastly guarding the rear were the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders.
We were the last of the British Army over on the Malay side. There was not another British troop over there except the 90 Argylls. That's all that was left. The CO gave the order retreat, and the two pipers piped us across the causeway. Very slow tunes they were playing. They were saying, "Come on, come on, come on, hurry up, hurry up."
There was a big woof, and we knew that the causeway had been blown up, and we were a fortress under siege.
We were actually on the causeway when it blew up. That's true. Yeah, but, oh, they made a mess of it. It was only a little bit. They only blew a little bit out, and the Japanese had it fixed in 2 or 3 hours. Hopeless. Everything was a shambles. Everything.
I said, that's the end of the British Empire. I think it was.
There were cases of desertion in the British, Indian and Australian ranks as the Japanese proudly pressed on into Singapore.
We were keen to show off to the people of Japan what we were doing. There we were, off to invade the fortress of the Orient and bring it to its knees.
Allied ships docked at Singapore till the 11th hour, delivering troops who would be captured without firing a shot and evacuating civilians. For many of them, it was a jump from frying pan into fire. Ships were sunk, their passengers drowned or taken prisoner. Sent out to pass on what he'd learnt fighting the Japanese, David Wilson had very mixed feelings.
At first, the delight that one was getting out of this hellhole. Secondly, terrible sort of feeling of regret and almost cowardice that one was running away from a battle, albeit under orders.
The nurses were also ordered out.
The nurses came round, our ones on the ward, and they were crying, told us they've got to go.
I've always said that's the worst thing that happened to me in my whole life. They said, you know, goodbye, good luck.
They didn't want to leave us, but they'd been told to pack their things, to evacuate them, get them away.
As we walked away, I walked away with the doctor. They were still calling out, goodbye, good luck, sister, and then almost an inaudible voice said, good luck, sister, she'll need it. We heard afterwards that our orderlies had rifles anyway, and they were going to shoot us, so our chances weren't very good anyway.
Your own orderlies were going to shoot you?
Oh, yes.
To save you?
Oh, yes, they weren't going to let the Japs touch us.
3 days after the nurses left, the British surrendered to a Japanese force half their number. Perhaps the worst defeat in British military history. A 130,000 British and Commonwealth troops became prisoners of war. Many died. All suffered. Tens of thousands of Singaporeans were executed, reprisal for backing the Chinese in their long war against Japan.
It was all darkness. The world that we knew had disappeared. And these strange people with guttural voices that we didn't understand were in charge of our lives, and they were cruel, brutal. It was the dark ages come to us, descended on us.
A unit of the Japanese 18th Division came along this railway line and up the slope to the Alexandra Hospital. Dick Lee was one of many wounded crammed in a corridor on mattresses. He became aware of a huge Japanese soldier, bristling with weapons, towering over him.
And as he looked at me and I looked up at him, he grinned and he had a gold filling. You can see it now on the left as he grinned, you know, like that. I could see that gold. And of course, I don't know whether I smiled back, maybe I did because I was shitting myself anyway. You know what I mean? You're not brave. You're not brave in these circles. You can't run anywhere. You can't defend yourself. What's going to happen to me? And you're feeling weak. You lost blood. You're knackered. But you get that butterfly feeling. What's going to happen here?
60 years on, Dick Lee returns to the Alexandra Hospital in Singapore.
While he was looking down at me, his friend had noticed an Australian soldier, wounded, coming down the stairs here with his arm in a sling. He had no jacket on at the top, just a pair of pyjama trousers, so his body was bare. As he come down the stairs, the second nip, as he stopped here like this, the second nip came over and just put the bayonet straight into him, standing here. As he stepped back and walked away, then I saw the Australian put his other hand up in front of the wound, and the blood was all running out of his fingers, and he just collapsed on the floor.
The Japanese ignored Dick Lee and went on a rampage. They slaughtered the wounded. They machine-gunned 9 orderlies who died pointing in vain to their Red Cross armbands. They bayoneted a patient on an operating table and shot the surgeons.
They could see people were lying there, defenceless. I couldn't imagine in my wildest dreams our blokes ever going in and doing what they done. It's tough.